The Schuyler sisters in Hamilton said it best. Look around, how lucky we are to be alive right now. History is happening. Anybody seen it? Look around, yes. How lucky we are to be alive right now, that history is happening. History is happening, and we are called to be those co-creators with our God in creating more just and generous relationships, a church community, schools, and our world. It's part of God's dream. Ellen so beautifully last week in her sermon articulated the dance, the rhythm that we participate in, to be a people who imagine with God's help, and then to create, to imagine and create, and of course during prayer time I added the necessity for rest, because that is part of our natural rhythm too. So if we look around to see how lucky we are to be alive right now, I hope you've had the courage to take in those impeachment hearings that have been on television, or maybe you've just caught some highlights or some snippets, because it's fascinating and a little frightening all at the same time. And I hope that you caught William Taylor, the acting ambassador to the Ukraine, during his closing statement as he eloquently lifted up the philosopher Martin Buber. Did you all catch this one that we've spoken about 3-4 weeks ago, about the difference between I and thou in our relationships and how we interact with one another? And there I stood transfixed to see on television during these hearings that are having global impact, that one of our leaders is talking about the way we are to treat one another and our nations. And he challenged, did anyone catch this one? I hope that you'll YouTube it, right? He challenged us to move away from relationships where we treat one another as objects. That's just transactional. It's quid pro quo, right? Can you believe we're all talking about Latin these days? I'm going to give you something, but I expect something in return. Seeing other people and nations as objects. And he said we need to transition into seeing one another as thou. Seeing one another as subjects, so that we treat one another with respect and understanding and compassion. And what was so fascinating about hearing this from someone who is interacting on our world stage was he took it from the personal level about how we are to be in relationship with one another, and he moved it to how we in the United States are to be in relationship with other nations, rather than seeing them as objects that we can just manipulate to continue for our gain. Are y'all with me? He talked about what does it look like to interact with people where we're subjects, where we treat one another with respect and understanding and compassion. So are we looking around? Are we looking around to see what a wonderful time it is to be alive right now, that history is happening, and we, unless this freaks you out, y'all, I'm going to bring it back down right here with us. We are participating in that co-creation. And we have been September, October, November. If you're visiting with us today, we'll catch you all up. We've been interacting with Diana Butler Bass's work, Grounded. Finding God in the World, a Spiritual Revolution. We've been talking about what does it look like for God not just to be out there, but God to be right here and right here within us. There's this major revolution that's happening within nations, within all religions. There's this shift happening, and we're participating in it, right? Here at Lynnhurst Church, because there's nothing worse than sleeping through a revolution, because we are part of it, so that we're not sleeping through it, that we are an active participating in relocating our God, not out there, but bringing God in here so that we can ground ourselves in that presence. And yet Butler Bass asks the $1 million question that we will continue to grapple with long after we end this sermon series. And here's the question. Where is God? God is right here. How should we act upon that? Well, that's up to us. That right here in this moment, how should we act upon that truth? That right here in this moment, in our very hands, resides the power to co-create relationships that give life, to co-create together a community that helps not just us flourish, but all people flourish. So we are invited, as the psalmist declared, That even though it seems as if the world is crumbling, that the seas are roaring, that the earth starts to fade away, that we are called to be those people to realize there is a God who is present with us. And what does that look like? Here's Diana Bass's words. If we understand that we are dirt, that God is the ground of all that is, well, then we might think twice about how we treat the soil. Did you catch our kids giving thanks for the earth this morning? If water is the river of spiritual and physical life, we will care about what we are doing to watersheds. If air sustains and we are made of stardust, then we will care about the sky and what happens to it. If we know about our roots, it's the first step to knowing ourselves and recognizing our common humanity, that web of belonging. Making home is a radical act of claiming a place in the world. Being neighborly is the path to empathy, of enacting the golden rule. Have you noticed, and I'm stepping away from Diana Butler Bass, the folks are already putting up their Christmas lights? Do we call them Christmas lights here in Minnesota because they seem to go up longer than just, right? And I know how gorgeous it looks when the SNOW starts to come, but because have you seen that? Y'all go for a walk later today and notice that our neighbors are putting out their lights. Even before Thanksgiving it's happening. I know the Black Friday sales are already happening too, but people are putting up lights realizing how important it is. And ask your neighbor about their inner light too. I know. Invite them over. Okay, back to Diana Butler Bass. Bill, history is happening right here. And we're all connected one to another. And it's something as simple as those gorgeous lights. I'm going to start making I need little cards. And maybe little gift cards. Do y'all do this when you're out on your walks and you want to go put it in their the doorway to say thank you so much for spreading the light? Does anybody do that? Does anyone have a template to share with me? Okay. Build in the commons. The we of our world house is to pull the vision of heaven out of the clouds to the earth here and now. We're constantly creating a sacred architect of dwelling, of God's dwelling and ours, as we weave nature and the built environment into a web of meaning. Awe and action are of a piece. So spirituality that we talk about, the ability to encounter and experience a God who loves us and delights in us, is not activity where we just sit here and we feel good together. It's fantastic in itself, isn't it though? But this awe that we experience is a gateway to compassion. It's a way that we are able to care for ourselves and then go out and care for other people. It's the way that we participate in this spiritual revolution as we become more agile together and experiment about what it means to be faithful. So here we are. Critics often worry that spirituality and mysticism seem passive and promote individualism. Yet two professors at the University of California at Berkeley have concluded that these experiences of awe actually lead to greater acts of compassion for others. Their research demonstrates a connection between spirituality and justice, between encountering God and acting on behalf of others. Experiencing the divine, experiencing the sacred in the world results in us being people who want to make the world a better place. Y'all still with me? It's that dance, right? It's the individual experience in going out and experience God in community. So we look around. What a wonderful time it is to be alive right now because history is happening. And when we encounter this God, it makes us want to make the world a better place. So now we need to come back to quid pro quo. Y'all with me? Quid pro quo, right? In the Latin, some folks think it's too hard to understand. And who knew that we would encounter quid pro quo in our in these impeachment hearings? Because it's so much about this transactionalism, right? Quid pro quo literally means this for that. A trade or transaction regarding favors. If you give me X, I'll give you Y. Quid pro quo also happens in uneven power arrangements. That's when it usually happens, doesn't it? A higher status beneficiary targeting and giving gifts to someone who's less powerful or maybe lower on that social status because ultimately it increases the value of the person giving the gift. That wealthy person or that person in power gets more power from being the giver. There are so many strings attached, right? Because when we start talking about thanksgiving and gratitude, some of us may wrestle with that because we have been the recipient of what we thought was this free-handed gift, yet we know that there are sometimes demands for favor or debts of gratitude. So this strange Latin quid pro quo is hurtful sometimes on a personal level when there are those strings attached. Diana Butler Bass says it's poisonous to communities because it sets up these unequal power dynamics. So in this season of Thanksgiving, and I'll wrap this up, y'all, might we be a people, rather than practicing quid pro quo, may we look to the opposite of it. Pro bono. For the good, for free. Might we be people who practice pro bono? It might be so difficult to imagine in the world in which we live, right? To be able to give a gift, to be able to give a word of praise, to be able to give a thank you, expecting nothing, except knowing that it's for the good and it's for free. In this season of Thanksgiving, might we imagine what that would look like in our personal relationships here at church, here in our work relationships, and in the world, to be a people who practice pro bono, for free, for good. That we could be extravagant and generous in showing our gratitude one to another, not expecting anything in return, not expecting that we'll move up the social status or that someone else will owe us a favor, but instead we just participate in creating the type of world that we are so hungry to inhabit. So let us continue being a people, knowing that God is right here with us and that we have the power to co-create the dream of God. Let us be a people who practice that pro bono together, where we give that gratitude in such extravagant, abundant ways that it nourishes and sustains us. So we ask, oh God, it would be true in and through us. Amen.